Welcome to the last week of this spring quarter of Explore the Bible. We're finishing up the book of Genesis, chapter 50, and we come here to the end. It's the end of Joseph's life. That's an appropriate way to end the book, isn't it? With the end of his life. Spoiler alert, Joseph dies. Okay, so before we go on into the passage, if you haven't already, be sure and subscribe. Hit the little subscribe button. Hit the like button. I appreciate it if you'll do that. If you've got a comment or a question, put that in there. Tell me where you're watching from. And be sure and share the video with somebody else too. That's always great if you'll do that. You want to support what we're doing? Look, right now while you're watching this, I'm actually in Greece. So I'm kind of in two places at the same time, right? I'm in Greece, coming back this week. I've been in Vermont and then in Paris, getting ready for Summer Olympics, preparing for ministry to the summer during the Summer Olympics. So then I'm in Greece. Touching base with some friends there and some ministry partners there. So I'm excited about this passage today. Okay, you didn't need to know all that, but there you go. All right, here we go. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, "If Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the suffering we caused him." So they sent this message to Joseph: "Before he died, your father gave a command." Okay. Jacob is dead. And the brothers are worried that Joseph was being kind to them because of his father, because of Jacob. So he wasn't going to kill his brothers while his father was still alive. But now that the father is dead, we're in trouble, right? If Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will repay us for all the suffering that we caused him. Even in this acceptance of grace and mercy from Joseph, they still questioned, because Joseph is a man. He's not God, he's a man. And he could lie. He could put on a face. He could pretend so that he could see his father again. He could pretend to make his father happy. He could only be acting this way because he didn't want to break his father's heart again after what we have done to him. I mean, you almost have a sense there that, well, if it was me, that's what I would do. So Joseph probably will too. All right. So they sent a message. They didn't go tell Joseph this. They sent a message and said, before your father died, he told us this. So they just make this up, right? But before Dad died, he told me this about you. Say this to Joseph. This is it's so fake, and they think it's just right? Because they are so far away. Say this to Joseph: "Please forgive your brothers' transgression and their sin, the suffering they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when their message came to him. His brothers also came to him, bowed down before him, and said, "We are your slaves." Okay, there's so much in this we want to just touch on kind of quickly here, right? But please forgive, right? Please forgive. They're asking for forgiveness, so they didn't believe it was forgiven already. All right, please forgive it, right? They recognized we caused you suffering. But I want you to notice this. They say, the transgression of the servants of the God of your father, not the transgressions of the servants of our God and the God of your father. Right? It's almost as if, not almost, it is them saying, we know that Jacob worshiped Yahweh. So forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God who we don't serve, but Jacob did, and you do. It's almost like that's what their acknowledgement is here, right? It's not our God, it's your God and Dad's God, not ours. And I don't know that that's necessarily true, but that is certainly the way it sounds, right? And it's like a joke of a message. Come on, really? And Joseph weeps. Now, this is interesting to me. Why did Joseph weep? Is it because he understands from this that they haven't believed his forgiveness? Is that why he weeps? After all that I've done, they still don't think I've forgiven them? Is it because this is the first time they've admitted the wrong of all they've done? Is that it? And so what he's offered to forgive, they are finally accepting forgiveness now, the opportunity to. They've repented of that. Is that it? I don't know. But he weeps. You might ask that question. Then his brothers come to him and they bow down and say, we're your slaves. They clearly thought, we're going to die now, right? But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. They're still terrified. Don't be afraid. He tells them this twice, right? Don't be afraid. And then again, he says what we saw last week, right? You planned evil. God planned it for good. This is Romans 8:28. What you planned for evil, God planned for good. That God takes all things and works them together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. This is his true, certain understanding that we saw last week in the passage. But they didn't believe him, did they? They just didn't see that. They couldn't understand that. It didn't make sense to them because that was not how they lived. And they thought everybody lived like them. Everybody they knew lived like them. Everybody they knew took vengeance. Everybody they knew would have killed them for what they did. And Joseph didn't. It just doesn't make sense to them, right? And so he has to reiterate to them again this day, I will take care of you and your children. And then he comforted them and he spoke kindly to them. Joseph was a better man than pretty much all of us, wasn't he? I mean, look, when he was a kid, when he was a teenager, he had his issues. He had his faults. He had his shortcomings. We've seen that. We've seen that in his story, right? But we also see that he was a man, as he grew, who stood faithfully towards God. He wanted to honor God in every way that he lived. He did not fall to temptation. He honored God even when he, by all rights, nobody would have blamed him for killing the wine taster who left him in prison for so long, right? For killing his brothers. Nobody would have held that against him. But that was not the way he lived. He was a man who loved God and who followed God and who saw how God worked and accepted God's plan so that he could look at them and say, God planned it for good. Excuse me. It wasn't just him saying, God redeemed that hardness, but he's saying God used that for good to help the survival of many people. So Joseph and his father's family remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years. He was 110 years old. He saw Ephraim's sons to the third generation. The sons of Manasseh's son Machir were recognized by Joseph. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land to the land he swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here. Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. They embalmed him because they were in Egypt, and that's what they did. And he, I'm sure, got a royal funeral. But look, this was not his home. This is where he was. And this is where God had blessed him greatly after going through great hardship. And he had attained great glory and great fame in the nation of Egypt, right? Among all the nations around him, he had gained great glory and fame. But this was not his home. He says, God is going to bring you up from this land to the land he swore to our fathers, right? And so he says, here's the one thing I ask. Carry my bones up from here. I'm going to die here. I'm going to be buried here. Don't leave me here. And he expected that deliverance to come. It would. 400 years later. 400 years later, that deliverance would come. Not then. But he was a man who loved God and who saw what God was going to do. He was not concerned about holding grudges here because, you know what? God used it. So how can I be mad about something God used? there's a lot to think about in this, part of discipleship in our own lives. I think just looking, now that we're at the end of this quarter, just looking at the story of Joseph and thinking about the qualities of Joseph that we would see in a disciple of Christ. And there's so many great things in his life that we ought to imitate in our own lives, right? As followers of Yahweh, followers of the God who keeps his promises, followers of the God who redeems the evil things that happen to us and brings good out of them. So there you go. Be sure and like, comment, share, subscribe. Hit the subscribe button now. We start Acts next week, the book of Acts next week, and explore the Bible. So if you're in that, we'll be in that together. We'll see you then.